I'm Willie Sullivan. As Keith said, I'm Senior Director of Electoral Reform Society. I keep a responsibility for Scotland. I'm responsible for the whole of the UK campaigns, but I keep a responsibility for Scotland. It's much because it is a place where there's a lot of interest in politics happening. There is everywhere now, to be honest, but there's been a history of electoral reform and changes coming about through devolution. So I think it suits the society well for me to have had that experience of where we've actually had successes, changes, and we can apply that to the whole of the UK. What I thought I would do when Keith asked me to come and speak was maybe just give you try and tell you a little bit about the society, make it mutually beneficial so that we can get something out of it and you can get something out of it as well. Keep my contribution short and maybe just hit on some key points so that then afterwards we could have a longer discussion and you could ask me the things that you're most interested in, and also tie in a bit of a workshop at the end of it. We are now from Parliament to Parliament do our 5-year strategic plan. I think Keith said at one point in his presentation what we've done in the past clearly hasn't worked because we don't have massive democratic constitutional reform yet. We need to revisit what we're doing for sure, and maybe come up with some new ideas about what how we might intervene. And I've designed a little workshop which hopefully is a bit of fun and enjoyable, but also might get us to think through what some of those interventions could be. So just quickly to do an introduction to the society, I think. I've given handouts with our objectives, our objects on it, and these are kind of really important because they're what we're bound by the company law and all the regulations that we should pursue. One is the first one is electoral reform and single transferable vote for all public elections, and then there's two more which are about deepening, broadening democracy, proper elections happening, and good political science research. Now, I know, I've worked with Keith for years, and Keith has been a brilliant supporter of this campaign and of the society, and I agree with him on most things. I have a slight kind of divergence on if we can just focus on electoral reform without considering the other parts of the constitution and democratic system, because I think as I'll go through this, I'll say that we've alighted on this idea that our politics is a system, and actually it's probably more helpful to think of it and look at it in a broad way if we're going to get change than try and focus on a little bit too narrow. But the bit at the end is about you being able to challenge that or challenge it now and come up with different questions, because I think we've only had that approach for a couple of years, but I'll just quickly go through the history just in case anybody wants more information on that and ask questions at the end. As Keith said, we're long-standing. 1884 we were set up. We were involved in things like the electoral system that was adopted by the Irish Free State, so that's why Ireland has a single transferable vote. Keith spoke about the Jenkins Commission, AV+. There was a lot of lobbying on that. We were involved in Scotland in the other, particularly through the Constitutional Convention in Scotland, when they decided they would have an electoral system, additional member system it's called, for the Scottish Parliament. Happy to take questions on that. And then the society was heavily involved. I was a consultant on the campaign in the early 2000s called Fair Share. Keith will remember that. And when we campaigned to get the single transferable vote for Scottish local government elections successfully. A lot to do with the Lib Dems in government there, and as Keith said, the negotiations that went on with Jack McConnell, who was then First Minister for Scotland. Interesting times, and I actually stood, at that time I was a member of the Labour Party, I'm not a member of any party now. In the 2007 elections, I was a councillor elected under the single transferable vote. So if you want to talk to me about fractional transfers as well, I can tell you a little bit about that, but let's try not to. And then the AV referendum, as Keith spoke about, I was involved in the campaign to get the referendum. We never wanted it to be about AV, but it kind of fell that way because of Gordon Brown. And a complicated thing, but anybody wants to ask questions about that, what happened there. And now we've arrived at this point, I think, where We've had some successes, and I've been quite close to the coming from Scotland and been working in Scotland. I worked for the Labour Party there for a while. I've been quite close to them, and then been close to our failures as well. I mean, I was a senior person in the Yes to Fairer Votes campaign, so I take responsibility for some of that failure. And putting those things together, that's where I've come to the conclusion, and others over the past 2 years anyway, that we need to think of this as a whole system. And I think, I don't know who was it said that if you want to understand the system, try and change it, or maybe if you want to change it, try and understand it. But I think both of those things apply. And one thing that we know about the political system is it's complicated, and probably too complicated for any one person to get their head around, because power shifts and moves about, and you can draw a diagram of where power might work or how policy is made within the British Labour Party, for example, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly how it works. There's meetings of people meet in coffee shops, people owe people favours. It's horrendously complicated. So I think there's an acknowledgement of that complexity, without a need to try and explain it all, because it's probably unexplainable. Acknowledge it, and then trying to find simpler routes through it to change. So we decided, and I'll tell you a bit more about why at the end of this, to focus on Labour at that point 2 years ago, after 2017, because our experience had told us we needed one of the big parties to shift on the issue of constitutional democratic electoral reform, and it wasn't going to be the Tories. We might have been wrong on that, but that's another thing for discussion. And I used to work for the trade unions. I worked for the party in the 90s when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister, and my job was to try and get the leadership policies through the conferences. So I knew pretty well. I mean, I'm not proud of it, but I was a bit of a hacker and carver and fixer for the leadership, so I knew how it worked. I know that the only way you're going to get policy through the Labour Party is to get trade unions on board, or at least you're not going to get it without them. We saw a good example is the last Labour Party conference. There was a massive movement from the constituencies to support another referendum on Brexit. But that was massive movement, massive campaign. It did shift the position a little bit, but the union bloc vote came in and just crushed it. You need the unions at least to not be antagonistic towards your position if it's going to come through the Labour Party. So for the last 2 years, we focused on a campaign for Politics for the Many, which was working internally with the trade unions and trying to get them to shift on it. And we worked on it as a whole system thing. We did a bit of really detailed research with BMG on voter segmentation, different tribes within the voters, and what they felt about these constitutional reform issues. And while there was a support for electoral reform, as soon as you hit it with hard arguments or counter arguments, then it collapsed. And so we knew it was really difficult to kind of shift on that issue. That combined with the fact with the vast majority of the trade unions were they campaigned actively against electoral reform. So me going to GMB and going we need you to adopt a policy on PR just wasn't going to work. So that research told us that there was a wedge issue that united a group of voters who you would call the old UKIP voters, the Brexit kind of traditional working class, would have voted Labour at one time, were economically kind of radical, socially a bit more conservative, with a group of kind of urban, green type people that probably live about here, to be honest. And this was the only issue that united them, was House of Lords reform. So we decided then that could be a wedge issue that we used as an argument for constitutional change, that a Lords elected under PR would be an issue that we could start to argue for PR, which wasn't going to be immediately blocked by the trade unions, or at that time we were working with the shadow cabinet Shadow Cabinet Secretary John Trickett, who was against PR. A lot of the Shadow Cabinet were against PR, but we wanted to get relationships and work with them, so they would work on the House of Lords, wider constitutional reform, looking at federalism, because the Labour Party needs a position on Scotland to block the SNP, and federalism is we were arguing for that 2 years ago. It's emerging now, and we also wanted to look at democratic innovations, because if we were thinking of Westminster and the politics as a system, then we had to have solutions. I probably should have started with this, but I don't know if you saw the recent surveys on what people for support for democracy, because it's in rapid decline. There was a majority actually who said that they didn't think democracy was the best system. I think it was in the high 40s. So it's there's a job to be done in reinvigorating representative democracy. Electoral reform is a crucial, important part of it. But how we get from here, where there's like antagonism in the Labour Party, antagonism in the Tory Party, to a position where that change might happen, let's hope we can talk a little bit more about that under the workshop. So I've just kind of touched on a few things there. The next 5 years are pretty important. Obviously, they're important for everybody, but I mean, we're now developing a strategic plan on the next 5 years. We're a small organisation, about 18 people. We're pretty stable though, because thanks to some of the work Keith and others did, we've secured our funding base. You can ask me about that if you want, but so we're in a good position really as a small campaign and organisation to have a bit of resource, to have the stability, and we want to get as many insights as possible over the next 6 months about the landscape out there, how it's changing, what are the threats, what are the opportunities for these issues. We want to set some clear goals for the next 5 years with milestones on the way to it. And we want to practice success, because I think the problem with having an issue like electoral reform, which is really, really hard to achieve actually, because you're talking about a fundamental reform of the British state and those power relationships within it. It's really difficult. But so we need to have success on the way to it, so that people know what it feels like to have success, get practiced at it, and then move towards it. So we're looking for ideas about that. And we also want to work with partners and networks. I don't think we've exploited that enough. I think aligning your networks towards an objective is a crucial element of any big change. So we're looking for ideas for the next 5 years. And I'll take questions now and any sort of discussion or points, and then we can have a kind of more deliberative session in a workshop. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I think there's a lot of hope there. All of the three candidates have spoken quite more than any other. I've heard other Labour speaking about constitutional reform. Keir Starmer actually said that he thinks that the wasted votes issue is important, and he says we need to have a hard look at electoral reform. We organised a hustings with Open Labour, and got some questions, challenged all of the candidates. But I think, yeah, I feel there's and again, I think it's how you couch it. The state is not neutral. The state can be used for whatever sets of interests have the most power to manipulate and control the state. This is an interesting point for Labour, because Labour know that the state on the whole has not been used in the interests of the people that they support and are elected by. So I think making that argument within what we've done up to now is, the Labour is try and make that systems argument going, you need to reform this British state, and part of that is electoral reform. And I think they're much more open to that than just a narrow argument on it's fairer on votes. I mean, I did mean to show this at the beginning, which is just why do we need electoral reform in a simple graph. This was after 29. This is after the last election there. This was shared like 190,000 times. So this is the Greens up to 900,000 votes. Brexit never got an MP, 700,000. Lib Dems up around about 300,000 votes. And then you see you can see that the parties which are geographically concentrated and are kind of single, we've got distinct single issues. The DUP, Sinn Féin, SNP don't need many votes to get their MPs in, whereas you get the more progressive parties, they tend to need more votes because they're spread out more across the country. Well, I think what happened in Scotland, I spent a week in Scotland and a week in London, so I kind of know both politics quite well. And I would say to you that, I mean, Scotland's a completely different place politically than it was before we had the Parliament, and it is here. And I think that kind of openness, plurality was allowed by the fact that we had a proportional electoral system partially. So without a doubt, whether voters can connect it with that, because there's so many other things going on for them. You know, there's the independence issues, there's the social policy issue, there's issues there's issues that actually affect their lives, which are probably better because we had a proportional plural system of government. But it's very hard for them to make that connection. But you know, that's my experience for sure. It does now, and actually they're just moving towards possibly having what they call a permissive system, where they'll allow the council to have their elections under PR if they want to. So a big job for us is trying to convince some of the councils to try and experiment with having it. Sometimes I come across as it's partly because I'm Doer and Scottish that I come over as not a bit pessimistic about this, but you know, I kind of think there's a lot at stake, and it's difficult, but it's really, really worth arguing and fighting for. And I can see the difference that's happened in Scotland, in my home country, when we've had these sort of constitutional reforms, you know, and I think England deserves it as well and more. So you know, it's difficult, and the type of system might influence your campaign strategy, and you know what might be more effective. For sure, if you go with an AMS system or mixed member proportionality, you don't have the problem of having to argue away the constituency link stuff. But then there's the other things about if you have a closed party list and the party gets so. Well, you know, we don't have to explain it in the Scottish elections. People just know that the votes were proportional. Well, I think that's an interesting question, because it kind of highlights on this kind of, can you and do you convince the people first, or is it an insider fix? Good to have that debate. Well, what happened in Scotland was, like, the Lib Dems done a deal with Jack McConnell, and it was as far as the local government vote was, and it was imposed, and the Labour councillors were paid off. When we got AMS in Scotland, the same. It was done by the Constitutional Convention. When we tried to have a referendum on it, I think New Zealand did it in a much smarter way, because I think I think it's difficult to have a reform of the electoral system without a referendum now. It would be difficult. Maybe if we could get legitimacy in something like a constitutional convention, and people believed that was a trusted proxy of the people, then you might be able to do it that way.